Hi, welcome to Let Them Eat Cardboard. My name is David. Today we're going to go over how to play Root, the Riverfolk expansion. We're going to start with the Vagabond, then we're going to do the Lizard Cult and the Riverfolk Company. We're going to go over each one setup and how to play in separate sections, so if you'd like to skip ahead to a specific faction, just click the link below. So let's start with the Vagabond. The Vagabond is the Lone Wanderer faction of Root. He is a single piece on the board. He has one single token, and he can kind of act as his own unique faction in that he's the only one that uses items. He's the only faction that has quests, and he can do various things and change his relationship with all the other factions and kind of carve out his own path through the game by either aiding those factions or becoming hostile with them and going to war, or completely ignoring them and just focusing on his own quests. He's the most unique playing and design-wise, so let's go over his setup. First off, you're just going to place your Vagabond in any wood space on the board, in any forest. He's the only faction that can be in the forest themselves and move through them. So we'll start with him in the middle. Next up, you're going to choose your character card. So the Vagabond faction has these different identities you can choose from, 3 in the base game and 3 in the expansion. We'll start with the Thief. Your character card is going to give you a unique ability for that game and determine your starting items. So let's go over these items. First off, we have the items with an S on them. These are starting items. So for the Thief, you start with a boot, a torch, a tea, and a sword. Most items go in your satchel here on the board, but tea has a special place up here. Gold and satchels have special places down here. So that's the starting items. They're marked with the S. Next up, we have these blank items that have no letter on them. These are the general supply items that can be built by anyone. So you'll place these at the top of the map on their track up here. They have a slot for each item that can be crafted. The Vagabond can also craft these. And lastly, you have these items marked with an R symbol. These are ruin items. At the start of the game, you're going to take the 4 ruins tiles and randomize the ruin items underneath them and place them on the board. There are 4 places on the board for the ruins. There are the 3 central locations here and then 1 to the far right. So those are the easiest items for the Vagabond to get initially, but you don't know which one is where. And if you need help setting it up, just have another player randomize and place those items so that you don't know where each one is. So let's go over the Vagabond's turn. First thing you do is you refresh items. So anytime you use an item, you'll flip it to the exhausted side, and that shows that you've used it, and you can't use it again until you've refreshed it. So the refresh action is 3 items plus 2 for each tea. So initially the Thief could refresh 5 items per turn. Next up, you can do your slip movement. As I said, the Vagabond can move through the forest, and the slip move is how you move into a clearing or forest for no cost. So you can move from the space you're in to any adjacent space. Crossing a road counts as moving to a new space. So if you go from forest to forest, that's your move. Or you can move to any adjacent clearing. If you're in a clearing, you can move to any adjacent forest or along any road to a clearing. If you're ever hostile with another faction, it usually costs a second boot to move into their space. But the slip move is a free, no-cost movement. And also note the slip is the only way for the Vagabond to move into the forest, which is important later on for reasons we'll get to. So that's how his slip works. Now we'll do the daylight phase. So first thing you can do is spend a boot to move 1 space, and that moves not into a forest. So basically you can move from a forest to a clearing or from a clearing to another clearing. And as I said, if you're hostile with a faction, you spend 2 boots to move into the clearings they rule. We'll get to how you become hostile as well. Next up, you can explore. This is where you will search the ruins for an item. You flip over your torch, and if you're in that space, you take whatever item is beneath it. for demonstration's sake, let's make sure we get the hammer here. You take the item underneath the ruin and you remove the ruin token, because that ruin space initially is a blocked building space, but once you've discovered the item there, it becomes open for other players to build buildings on it. So you take the item and place it on your player board, and that's Explore. Next up is Aid. So this track up here, this section of your player board, tracks your relationship with each other faction in the game. So if you're playing the standard base game, you would have one marker for each of the three factions, the Eyrie, the Marquis, and the Woodland Alliance. They're going to all start in the Indifference section. Every time you aid them, you're going to move up on this track. The cost of aid starts at 1, then 2, then 3 aid actions. So the aid action itself is exhaust an item of your choice, any item. Give them a matching card of the clearing type you're in. So if you're down here in the rabbit space, you'd have to give them either a rabbit card or a bird. So we'll give them a bird card. And you're going to move up on that track. If they have crafted an item, you could then gain that item from them. Let's say they had a crossbow we wanted. It's not optional. They have to give you that item if you give them a card for the aid action. And then the next time you want to move up on the track, it costs 2 aid actions, so you'd exhaust 2 items and give them 2 cards matching their space, and you'd move up and score that level of victory points. The third time is 3 actions, so 3 items and 3 cards to get to Allied. That scores you 2 points and becomes Allied. Once you're Allied, you can actually move with their pieces and warriors for movement and battle. So you can actually use their armies for your means to an end because you've become allied with them. And every aid action at that point scores you 2 victory points. So you can feed them a bunch of points or a bunch of cards to score a lot of victory points quickly. If you ever attack and remove an enemy or another faction's piece, you immediately go to the hostile zone, and then you score victory points for removing their pieces in battle. So that's the aid action and the relationship track. This is really the meat of the game for the Vagabond. It's all about managing this and determining who you're going to work with and who you're going to work against to kind of decide how you're going to play out your role in the game as the Vagabond. Next up, you have the quest action. The Vagabond has access to these quest cards. There are going to be 3 drawn at any given time. And to complete a quest card, you have to be in a matching clearing of that quest type. And then you exhaust the items shown. And then you can choose which reward. You either draw 2 cards or you gain 1 victory point per fox quest you have completed. So initially 1 point, then the second one of a fox type is 2, 3, etc. So if you really focus on these quest cards, they can ramp up in victory points very quickly. But you're using those items for those quests as opposed to their other uses. Next up, you have Strike. If you have the crossbow, you simply flip the crossbow and remove a piece in the clearing you're in of your choice. It has to remove warriors first, then it can remove buildings or tokens. So you have to attack the warriors first with it, but you don't have to roll dice. It just immediately removes a piece of your choice. And then you have the repair and craft action using hammers. So the crafting cost for any card is shown in the bottom left. For the Vagabond, since they can't roll a clearing, they just have to be in that clearing type. So in this case, they have to be in a mouse clearing and spend 1 hammer because it has a one icon. And then you craft that item and you immediately gain it and you discard the card and score victory points. There are some cards that require 1 of each type of clearing. The Vagabond could never craft this card because he can never be in more than 1 clearing at a time. And then the ones that require 2 for crafting, or 3, you simply would need 2 hammers. There aren't 3 hammers, so you could never complete the 3, I believe. But the 2, you would just need 2 hammers and be in that clearing type to complete and craft that item. Repairing, if you are ever hit in battle, you move items down to the damaged slot of your choice. you move the ones you choose down to damaged. And for repairing, you flip the hammer to repair any one item of your choice. The other way to repair, if you got hit a couple of times and you need to repair a lot of items, if you end your turn in a forest, you can spend that evening resting and you immediately repair any damaged items. So the way you do that, since you can't move with the boot into the forest, you use your slip action at the start of your turn and basically skip your whole daylight phase to just focus that whole turn on repairing items. It's an expensive turn, so combat can be very dangerous for the Vagabond and really set him back. But if you need to repair a lot of items, that's your only choice. Next up, you're going to draw a card, and you get an additional card draw for any coins you have gained. Then you discard down to 5, and then you remove any items down to 6, plus 2 for each bag. So that the number of bags you have determines how many items you can have. One last thing is the way battle works for the Vagabond. You exhaust a sword, and you can do hits up to the number of undamaged swords you have. Each battle action requires exhausting one sword, but then at that point you can do hits equal to the number of swords you have, whether they're exhausted or unexhausted. So if you had 2 swords, you flip one, you roll a die, you can do up to 2 hits. And like I said, any hits you take equal damaged items. Your Vagabond piece never gets removed from the board. And the last mechanic for the Vagabond I want to talk about is the way dominance cards work. You would never have a chance at completing a dominance card because you can't rule a clearing. The Vagabond can never rule a clearing. He's only just kind of hanging out there. So the way these work for you, in a 4-player or more game, you can play a dominance card to form a coalition with the player that is in last place. Once you form a coalition with that player, you remove your victory point track token and put it on their player board. Once you have done that, you win the game if they win the game. You are saying, I'm going to help you get out of last place and try to help you win. If they get to 30 points, you both win. If they play a dominance card of their own, then you're just trying to help them achieve that dominance victory. So the Vagabond has a really powerful play in a big player count game, in that he's the only faction that can form that coalition and form that alliance with another player to have a shared victory and a shared goal on top of the allied status. So it can be a very hard thing to do, to come from behind and win like that, but 2 players working together in this game can be very strong and can really change the tides of if there's a runaway leader, or if there's one player that really establishes a stronghold on a corner of the board or something. Working together can really unseat them, and you can make that big comeback victory as 2 people working together. Other than that, the Vagabond really has his say in how he plays. He's very open. He has a lot of leeway in being creative with how you use items and how you aid other factions. You know, you can sneak into a town, give them a card, and take the item you really need, like the crossbow, and immediately use that crossbow on them to take out a crucial building that they have undefended there. Or you can be sneaky and just pop into town with your slip action, take out a token for sympathy before the Woodland Alliance player can make their big move, and then use your boot to scuttle away and be in safety and get away from them. But as the Vagabond, you do have to be very careful of the enemies you make, because a single combat against you can really set you back multiple rounds because of the way the damaged items work. If you don't have unexhausted items, you can't do anything. If you have damaged items, you can't do anything. So it's really crucial that you play the political game as the Vagabond extremely tight, and don't make enemies too early, or don't hang around where those enemies can really get to you if you're hostile with them, because that can really set you back. Also be wary, even if you're not hostile with another player, you could be up to allied, but if that if that player thinks you're close to winning, they might come in and whack you anyways and force you to do damage to them and remove a piece in battle because you roll as the defender. And when you do that damage to them, you immediately go hostile, and they forced your allied status to go hostile, so you can't take that aid action and feed them points anymore, or feed them cards for points anymore. So they can really hamper your strategy by being hostile towards you initially instead of waiting on you to stab them in the back. So just be wary of that as well. Other than that, the Vagabond is really fun to play. I do want to touch on if you're playing with 2 Vagabonds with the expansion, you can play with 2 Vagabonds in the game. You randomize all the ruins items, and the player that explores that ruin first gets a choice of the item. Or you can spend 2 torches and take both of them in one round if you have 2 torches. So that's how that works. The quest cards are shared. They're a shared market row of quest cards for double Vagabond. And I already mentioned that you don't have a relationship token with the other Vagabond. You'll always just be indifferent and unable to do anything with them. Next up we have the Lizard Cult. These are the religious fanatics of the woodlands, and they are trying to gather the outcasts of the forest that have been kind of exploited and discarded and disenfranchised by the other factions, and then convert them into being their own religious zealots and acolytes to do their bidding and complete rituals in their gardens that they are building and spreading, and that is how they're going to score most of their victory points. They have this interesting Lost Souls track, which is going to determine which of the animal types in the forest is the outcast or even the hated animal type, and they're going to basically seize those animals' anger towards the rest of the factions and use them to do their bidding at a much cheaper discounted rate. So first off, let's do setup. You're going to take 4 warriors and a matching clearing or matching garden type of the clearing of the corner opposite the marquee and the eyrie. So wherever they're at, you're going to go to a corner opposite them, or if they're both in the game, you'll go into the other corner. And you're going to place your 4 warriors there, the matching garden type, and then 1 warrior in each adjacent clearing. Next up, you're going to fill your gardens track with the rest of the matching garden buildings. And you're going to place the outcast token in the starting place of your choice. So first we'll go through how your turn works. The Lizard Cult is really driven by the other player's actions because of this Lost Souls deck. So anytime another player spends or discards a card, instead of it going beside the deck like normal, it's going to go to your Lost Souls pile here. So at the start of your turn, you're going to adjust the Outcast track. The Outcast is the most common animal type in the Lost Souls deck at the start of your turn. So here we have 1 of each card type and 2 of the mice. Birds don't count for anything in here because the lizards hate the birds. So you're only going to look at the main 3 animal types, and whichever one has the most, that's going to be the outcast for that round. If it is already the outcast, it would become the hated outcast. And we'll go over that in a minute. So we have the mice here, and then after you adjust that, you're going to discard that Lost Souls deck. Now you can perform conspiracies in those outcasts clearings. This is where you'll spend acolytes, which at the moment we don't have any, but let's pretend we had, let's say 4. So the conspiracies you can complete are Crusade, where you spend 2 battles to do, you spend 2 acolytes. When you spend acolytes, you just return them to your supply from your acolytes track. You spend 2 acolytes to do battle in any outcast clearing, or move from any clearing and then battle in that destination clearing. So you would spend 2, and then you can move and do battle in a mouse clearing. So for here, we have 1 area we could do that where there is a mouse building, but let's pretend they had a warrior there. We can move some of our troops up and do battle there with the Crusade. Next up we have the Convert, where you can spend 2 acolytes to remove an enemy warrior in an outcast clearing and place a warrior there. So let's pretend we had the Riverfolk here. You could remove an enemy warrior and place a warrior. So it's basically a free battle, and you gain a warrior there. You converted their warrior to your zealots. And lastly, you can sanctify, which is spend 3 acolytes to remove an enemy building and build a garden. So this is the way you build your gardens, or one of the ways you build your gardens. So you're going to take the garden of the matching clearing type and place it there in that building's place. So those are the 3 conspiracies. Those are the ways you're going to spin acolytes each round. Now note, you also have this revenge mechanic where anytime you're defending in battle and you lose units, instead of just going back to your supply, they become acolytes. They basically were successful martyrs in your religious war, in your crusade, and they are going to kind of enrage and gain sympathy from your other supporters, and you get more acolytes to spend. Next up, you are going to do your daylight phase. This is where you're going to actually, you have an interesting mechanic here where you're going to reveal cards to do different things. The first thing you can do is reveal to build. So let's say we didn't build in that clearing type before. You can reveal a mouse card to build a garden in a matching clearing you rule. So we would rule that space and build a mouse garden there. Next up, you can recruit, which is place a warrior in a matching clearing from your supply to a clearing that you're playing a card from. And next up, you can score. So when you score, let's pretend we build another mouse garden somewhere. You score by revealing a card type once per round of each suit, and you're going to score the highest uncovered number on your gardens track. So for the mice, you reveal a mouse card and we score 2 points. Later on, we could score 3, and if we built gardens of other types, we could reveal those as well and score those each time. So you want to get your gardens out and then start scoring them each round if possible to start shooting up the victory track. Lastly, if you have a bird card, you can spend a bird card to move one of your warriors from the map to the acolyte's box. You're basically using the birds to force a sacrifice of one of your units, and then because you use that action, they're going to become an acolyte instead of just being removed from the map. In the evening, you're going to return revealed cards to your hand. So any of those cards you revealed for those different actions, they actually go back to your hand. They're not spent. You're going to discard down to, or you're going to draw cards. And later on in the victory or in the gardens track, you can have extra card draw here. And then you'll discard down to 5 cards. So strategically, the lizard cult, once they get out on the board, they can score a lot of points very quickly with their gardens. And they also rule any clearing that they have a garden placed. Just that one building being there gives them rule of it. So it's easy for them to hold control of a location once they're out, sort of like the Woodland Alliance. And once they've established their gardens, they can score a lot of points. And they don't even use those cards up, so they can just keep scoring points every round if they have those clearings and their gardens built. So they're very powerful if they get going, but because so much of their game is determined by the outcast track, the other players can really determine what they can and can't do. The conspiracies all happen in the outcast clearing type. So if you know that they have a lot of power in a mouse clearing, or they need to do a big play in a mouse clearing, you could play a lot of rabbit or fox cards and make sure that that outcast is going to be the rabbits or the fox type. Then they can't execute those conspiracies in the mouse clearing. However, if you mess up and give them hated outcast, if it's already an outcast and then it comes their turn again and it's the same type as the majority in the Lost Souls deck, it flips to hated. Then they can complete all their conspiracies at an even cheaper rate, and it reduces the acolyte cost by 1. So then they can spend 1 for a crusade, 1 for a convert, and only 2 for a sanctify, as opposed to 2, 2, and 3. So if you let them get to hated in the clearing type that they really need to do a big play in, they're going to make big moves. They're going to do a lot of battles, they're going to do a lot of converts, and they're going to build their garden there almost for free compared to what it would normally cost them. So playing against them, you really have to pay attention to the Lost Souls deck and what you're playing and what that's going to allow them to do. But as the Lizard Cult, you want to try to make sure you are spreading out to every clearing type so that you can maximize your scoring from that score discard action or reveal action. So that's the Lizard Cult. They are very unique and very thematic. They're pretty dark if you think about some of the actions they're taking as far as religious zealotry and war and terrorism, but they're also very interesting in their space in this game. So lastly, we have the Riverfolk Company. These otters are the traders and merchants of Root, and they are an economic-based faction. They're going to be selling services and goods and doing some trading and stuff to spread their wealth and score victory points. They're going to establish these trading posts throughout the forest. For setup, you're going to place 4 warriors in any clearing along the river. So you have these 5 spaces on the river. I did 2 and 2. And then you're going to place 3 warriors in your payments box at the top of your player board. Set your initial prices for your services. We'll set them all at 2. And then put your trade post tokens in their track. So the Riverfolk also has an open hand. They're going to keep their cards revealed at any time for selling their cards. And they're basically going to work on, if you want to look at it with a cynical view, they are war profiteers and animal traffickers, because they are going to be taking in payments of other animals from the other factions to accomplish their goals and sell their services. So first off, they can move along the river. They're the only faction that can move along the river innately. They can also sell their warriors for other players' uses with their mercenaries. And then they can sell their movement along the river as a riverboat. So those are the 3 things they sell: their hand cards, their warriors for other players to use, and movement along the river. So that's what the prices of these services are. Other players are going to pay for these services by taking warriors from their supply and putting them into your payments box. So if the price is 2, they would put 2 warriors in your payment box. Then on your turn, you're going to be able to use these payments to do your different actions. So the various ways they do this, at any time they can pay, at the start of their birdsong, they can pay for 1 service plus 1 per clearing with a trading post that they have a piece. So if they have a piece in a fox clearing and you have a trading post there, they can buy another service by giving you more funds. The mercenaries give you a battle and rule based on the pieces you have there. They pay for your mercenaries, and then they can use them for battle and for claiming rule of that clearing. And damage, they have to split the damage between their pieces and yours if they've paid for mercenaries. And the Vagabond cannot pay for mercenaries. The Vagabond, since he doesn't have warriors to pay for your funds, he must exhaust items equal to the cost of your service. So let's go over what you can do with these funds and how your actions work. So the first thing you'll do if you have nothing in your payments box would be put 2 warriors in there. Next up, you would score dividends. So you would score, if you have a trade post on the map, you score 1 point for every 2 warriors in your funds box. So this would score 2 points. So that's your birdsong. And gather funds at the end of birdsong. Any warrior on your board is going to go to the funds box next. So that's where everything from payments goes down to funds, and anything that was in commitments goes up to funds, and anything that were spent on trading posts or crafting would go to funds. Everything on your board is going to come back to here unless it was spent and removed from your board. Now this is where you're going to spend your funds to do different actions in the daylight phase. You can spend a fund, you commit a fund to move on the board. You commit a fund to do battle. You commit funds to empty spaces on the trading post track of that clearing type to craft. So if you had to craft a fox clearing, you would put one of your funds into a trading post smart that is uncovered there. And also, when you're crafting, instead of taking the listed effect of the crafted card, you can discard that card and place another warrior in your payments box. So basically, you're just getting more economic use out of it instead of the crafted good. You can also commit a fund to draw a card. And you can spend a fund to place a warrior in any clearing on the river. When you spend a fund, if it's your warrior, the token would go back to your supply, and if it's another player's token, it would go back to their supply. Now, lastly, you can establish a trading post with a garrison. You spend 2 funds of a clearings ruler. So if you wanted to establish a trading post in this rabbit clearing and the lizard cult rule it, you would spend 2 of theirs, and then you would place a trading post in that clearing. And the clearings can only hold 1 trading post. You also get a warrior there when you build that trading post in that clearing. In the evening, you're going to discard down to 5 cards and then adjust your service prices for the next round. So the Riverfolk Company strategically, they have a lot of interesting ways to play, because you can try to really entice people with the pricing to get more funds and more payments to use, and then you can determine how aggressive you're going to be with these funds. If you leave them in your fund box and don't commit them or spend them, you're going to score more points for those dividends each round. You're basically just accumulating interest on your wealth. But if you're going to be aggressive and spend and commit all of these funds to take different actions, you're not going to score as many points innately. And then you're going to rely on just building out your trading posts or doing battle and stuff or crafting for points. So you can have like a really aggressive low pricing strategy where you're going to let other players get a lot of extra actions just to get a lot of payments. Or if there's something they really need, like a card they really need, you can set your price high and try to get a lot of payments that way. And the different factions will also be more willing to will and deal for your services based on the number of warriors they have in their supply. For instance, the Woodland Alliance don't have very many warrior pieces to pay for payments, but the Marquise does have a lot of warrior tokens that they can spend on payments. So you can really play the economic game with the factions differently and determine how you're going to use those payments and those funds and how you're going to spend them on commitments or spending actions. So also note that the Riverfolk, the otters, are the kings of the river. The river becomes very important when they are in the game, because all of a sudden you can get from here to here very quickly. Whereas normally that would be, you'd have to go through clearings that might have another player ruling them. Whereas here you can just jump down the river by paying for the river boats. Or the Riverfolk themselves can just sneak up across the river very quickly with their swimming ability. So you really have to pay attention to the river when the Riverfolk are playing, because you can get used to not even caring about it when they're not in the game, to all of a sudden it being the most important track of movement in the game. Also, the trading posts, while they let the other faction score points, you want these in your clearings that you're ruling so that you can will and deal for these services that can be very valuable. Getting a specific card for certain factions can be extremely powerful. So you want to be able to spend your warrior tokens to the Riverfolk and get those exact cards you need. Maybe it's a specific item for the Vagabond, or maybe it's a bird card for the Eerie, or a specific card that another faction needs to accomplish something like a revolt for their supporters deck. So I think that the selling of cards is the most interesting for the Riverfolk, and following that would be the mercenaries. Letting other players use your tokens for battle can be really interesting. Because really, as the Riverfolk, you're not going to be super aggressive. You're not going to be doing too much attacking as much as doing the whole wheeling and dealing and trying to sell services and spread your trading post and just accumulating funds to score dividends. So you're fine with them going off and just, having your pieces die, because then you're just going to get more stuff you can throw into your payments box. So I really like the design of the Riverfolk. They really changed the game up for everyone, but your service pricing is really going to determine how much the other players are using your services and giving you payments. So you really can't be too greedy, or else they're not going to give you the payments you need to take the actions or score points. So that is Root, the Riverfolk expansion. Excuse the lightning and thunder outside. I really like this expansion. I like the factions it adds. They really change up the game a lot and have a really unique design, even compared to the base game. Every faction in this game is extremely unique, but these play off of the other factions in the most interesting ways, in my opinion. Both of these factions care a lot more about what the other players are doing than any of the base factions. Both the Riverfolk with their services and the Lizard Cult with their Lost Souls deck, both of those systems are really determined and really affected by the other players' actions. You know, the cards that the other players playing, determining the Lost Souls and Outcasts, completely change what the Lizard Cult can and want to do. And then the Riverfolk really depends on other players wanting to use their services and spend those warriors to their funds box and their payments, so that they can actually have the funds necessary to take their own actions. So I think these are both advanced factions. I would say you really need to learn the base game and every faction in it before trying these. Not because these are more mechanically complicated, but because they are more dependent on the other factions and knowing what the other factions want to do and how they do it, more so than any of the base factions. The only one in the base game that has a similar function is the Eerie. The Eerie's decree can really be messed with by other players if they need to battle in a certain clearing type. The other players can just evacuate that clearing and not give the Eerie that chance, and that can really change up how the Eerie plays or ruin their plans. Both of these factions have similar designs, but even more so. I do think they're a little harder to play as well, but I think that's a good thing. When you're playing with less experienced players, it's good to have a more interesting and mechanically challenging faction that's not necessarily weaker from an inherent standpoint, but that can be more challenging for an experienced player. I would also not play with the second Vagabond unless you're playing with 4 or more players. If there's only one other normal faction in the game and you have 2 Vagabonds running around, that other player is going to have a really terrible time and not be able to do much against those Vagabonds if they know what they're doing. And with more than 4 players, or 4 or more, the 2 Vagabonds add an interesting dynamic, especially when they're fighting for the same items or racing to the ruins. They can kind of chase each other around and really mess up each other's plans, especially when they're trying to compete for the same quest cards or something like that. And the other players can try to wheel and deal with each one and ally or form a coalition with the others. And it really changes up the game and makes it really interesting. I think with 6 experienced players, having 2 Vagabonds would be really fun and really interesting. And then also, I would say like the Riverfolk. The more players in the game, the more interesting the Riverfolk are, because they're going to be selling more services and the river is going to be used a lot more. It's going to be a really dynamic game. The Lizard Cult is really fun to play, but man, it's kind of sink or swim with them. It's feast or famine, it feels like. If they can get some gardens out, they can just steamroll through the points track. But if the other players manipulate that Lost Souls deck well, they can have a really miserable time. So that's the Root expansion, Riverfolk. I love both of these factions design-wise. Strategically and mechanically, they are really interesting and very different from any of the base factions and from one another. And having the second Vagabond, if only for all the new identities, is worth it in my opinion. The Vagrant identity for the Vagabond character, I think, is a really fun character to play. He can cause a fight in a clearing and choose the attacker and defender, and he scores the points for all of those pieces removed. So he can really run around the board instigating fights between factions and causing all kinds of chaos, and I love that. So definitely check out this expansion if you like the base game. Let me know if you have any questions below, and hopefully you enjoyed this How to Play.